Hello, you're watching What's On at Cineworld. I'm Laurie Blake, I'm joined by Luke Owen, and we're going to be discussing all of the latest cinematic releases, some great movie news, and a bunch of other stuff. But let's get right into it and see what's coming up on this week's show. And you've got some great new movies to choose from, like An American Pickle, starring a pair of Seth Rogens as a Jewish immigrant perfectly preserved for 100 years in a vat of brine, and his web developer grandson as they reconcile fame and family in New York. And if you wanted to hide out from the scorching heat this week, then you could do worse than spending a day watching the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy, which returns to cinemas. Malprecious. Or you could take the red pill and see The Matrix in 4DX. And to wrap things up, Luke and I will be discussing James Gunn's The Suicide Squad and the exciting news that we're going to be getting a first look very soon. Good news, Luke. There's new films in the cinema this week. It's happening. Yeah. We're getting back to reality. There's some really good stuff actually coming out this week. There's quite an interesting little film from Seth Rogen. This is directed by Brandon Trost and written by Simon Rich. It's based on a New Yorker article called Sellout that Simon Rich wrote. It's been adapted. It's called An American Pickle. Now, from the title, Luke, can you guess what it's about?
It's funny, isn't it? Because like I hadn't really heard much about this movie, and then I saw the trailer for it, and I was like, man, I want to see this film. I really, really want to see this film because, like, I mean, who in this world doesn't love Seth Rogen? Like, who doesn't love a Seth Rogen movie? And you know what would make a Seth Rogen movie better? Two Seth Rogens. So, like, yeah, dude, I'm well in for this.
Well, this is how we get to two Seth Rogens, right? Let's explain it a little bit. So this is a film about a Jewish immigrant to the US from the sort of early 1910s called Herschel Greenbaum, who moves with his wife for a better life. His wife's played by Sarah Schnook. He becomes a rat killer in a pickle factory in a sort of attempt to work his way up the ladder. However, he falls into a vat of pickles just as the factory becomes sort of derelict and shut down for nearly 100 years. They prise open the pickle vat that he fell into in 2020 and discover inside a perfectly preserved Jewish man.
because the pickle brine,
yeah,
perfectly preserved him. You know what? When you write it down, it's like the Jurassic Park amber. It just makes sense.
It's Futurama, but it's Futurama, but it's a sort of Jewish Futurama. and yeah, it's like it then also becomes a kind of fish out of water comedy or a man out of brine comedy, if you want. Like he becomes a bit of a celebrity because he's the pickle man. They kind of, the newspapers and everyone picks up on this notion that this guy has been found in this vat. Then they try and track down his family, and you know, his wife has passed away. His children have also deceased, but he has a grandson, Ben Greenbaum, who's also played by Seth Rogen. So this is Seth Rogen acting opposite Seth Rogen as two different generations of the same family, and it very much becomes about I guess like almost like looking at your part, like, you know, Herschel Greenbaum represents to Ben's character his past given form, right? It's about really like reconciling with where you came from and sort of the way that your past represented itself, because there's a lot of stuff in here about, like, you know, Herschel as a character has very sort of the kind of values that people like to put a lot of stock in these days, of being a bit resilient and being, you know, like wanting to sort of drag himself up by his bootstraps. But then he's also got a lot of quite negative traits that Ben has to kind of deal with as sort of being a bit of an outdated dinosaur. And I think that becomes quite an interesting little wrinkle that runs through this film. But also, like, you know, you get to see Seth Rogen acting opposite Seth Rogen. That's quite a treat. And you know, these are guys who know Seth Rogen pretty well. Like Brandon Trost was the cinematographer on The Disaster Artist and This Is the End, so has worked with Rogen before. It feels like a very imaginative take on a Seth Rogen film. Like, you know, I can't see we'll be getting the bog standard Seth Rogen laugh in this one.
Yeah, you talk about how, like, you know, it's the sort of differing it's the differing sort of takes on the world. There's that moment in the trailer when the older Seth Rogen says, like, we have an old saying, from the old country, and Seth Rogen's like, "Oh, I'm sure this will have dated well," and it's.
Yeah.
It's really nice. I wonder if like Seth Rogen saw that Paul Rudd series they did on Netflix and was like, "Hey, I could star alongside myself as well. I could do that."
Yeah, Paul, you're not the only one.
I'm really really down for this film. And one of the things that with the sort of cinema the way that it is at the moment, we're not getting to these sort of like big blockbuster movies. We're not getting Tenant just yet. We're not getting Black Widow just yet. So what this means is that these sort of movies like An American Pickle and the Vigil that we're going to talk about in a moment that might have sort of flown under the radar are now just like, hey, these are the films you should go check out this week.
Yeah, these are the headliners, right? These are the newest, freshest things that you can go see in. And it's weird to be saying that about a pickle, but these are the newest, freshest things that you can go and see in the cinema. So let's talk a little bit about the Vigil, because actually there is a bit of a theme about the two biggest new movies in cinemas this week, and it's Judaism. So this is a film. It's a horror film, The Vigil, and the premise is that it's set in the Borough Park district of Brooklyn, which is a very Orthodox Jewish community, and it stars Dave Davis as a lapsed member of the Hasidic community, and he goes to this support group for some unnamed trauma in his past, and while he's at the support group, he's asked to go and be what's known as a shomer, which is the sort of a watchman or a guardian for a recently deceased person. So the idea is that they would sit with the body from the moment that the person has died until the burial, to ward off evil spirits. However, it seems like there is no warding off the evil spirits because they're already there. And the person that he's guarding the body of is a Mr. Litvak, who was a bit of an eccentric, and he was a Holocaust survivor. But in the process of surviving the Holocaust, seemingly attracted a dibak, which is a demon from Jewish folklore, and they sort of latch on to people. And now that this person is deceased, this creature is looking for a new host. And Mr. Litvak's wife is part of the cast in the film, but because she's got dementia, it seems like this creature is looking for somebody else, somebody a bit more young. And Dave Davis's character seems to fit that mold. It looks pretty creepy, and I think it's got this. It's just this really interesting premise. I think it's like it becomes very much about escaping your past, and there's this whole thing with the demon's like head is on backwards and stuff like that. So it's always looking behind it. It's always reflecting on where it's been. And that's what Dave Davis's character's got as well. Like there's so many interesting little wrinkles to this film. And you've got it really like steeped in a culture that I don't think really gets represented in films in this way. It does. It's not. This is not just like pandering to like. He's like a lot of characters in films are Jewish, and it's very sort of washed over very quickly. And this is so steeped in Jewish culture and law and folklore that I just think it's got to be a really fascinating film, and it looks terrifying.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I love Blumhouse movies. I think that Jason Blum is one of the smartest men working in Hollywood today. He's a man who is willing to take a lot of risks. Like there are big studios probably wouldn't have greenlit this movie. They wouldn't have given it a chance or a time of day. But Blumhouse is the sort of person that would give this movie the time of day. He will take risks on new directors and new and original ideas. And this is a new and original idea, and I really like that. There's actually one of the trailer quotes of the movies, from a review, is that this has the potential to be the new horror franchise, and I'm all for that. Like I really love. I'm a big horror fan. I love being scared in the cinema as well. I think there's a really unique experience about that, being like sort of surrounded by people who are also just as scared as you are, which certainly helps when I go with my wife, who is very easily scared. And I'm really, really intrigued by this movie. It's the sort of film that I would have only thought I would have seen at like Fright Fest, but I'm actually going to get to see it, sort of like on a wide scale. And it's one of the big releases of the week. So yeah, I think it's going to be really, really cool.
Yeah, I think it's got such a cool setup. I love horror films where leaving is impossible, and not just because like you're locked in the house or whatever it is. It's because it's like there's social pressure to stay, and that's what this film is providing. It's like this weight of expectation of an entire community for Dave Davis's character to stay in that house, even though he's
like
being
lockdown, really.
completely being terrorized. Yeah. Yeah, well, so yeah, if you want an experience that's a little bit like lockdown, go and see The Vigil. If you are looking for something a little bit less traumatic, there is also 3 other films that would be perfect to take your kids to go and see, and that is The Fairy Princess and the Unicorn, which is about a family of fairies attempting to reunite a dragon with its parents. It all looks very lovely. You've got Snow Queen Mirrorlands, which is about a king exiling all the magicians in a kingdom to the Mirrorlands, and it's got the kind of big sweeping Nordic vistas that you'd expect from the Snow Queen, obviously, and Frozen, and it's even got a big icy castle type thing, so kids would be pretty pleased with that. And then you've got 100% Wolf, which I think is the most interesting of the bunch to me, which is about a kid called Freddie, whose family are all werewolves, and it's like his big day to like turn into a werewolf and achieve his true form, and he wants to become 100% wolf. And then at the moment when the full moon shines, he becomes a tiny little dog, a tiny little white poodle dog, and he's got a little bit of time. They give him to the next full moon to prove that he's a wolf truly, or he's going to be banished from his family. And it seems to be a sort of a buddy adventure where he goes out and he meets all the sort of dogs in the local neighborhood, and it looks very, very nice. However, if none of that sort of tickles your fancy, there is also a bunch of other stuff coming into Cineworld. Like we talked last week about Back to the Future and Jurassic Park and the Dark Knight trilogy all hitting screens. This week, they're adding even more at Cineworld to the cinema for you to go and see. You've got The Matrix in 4DX, which I've seen and I very much enjoyed. Like I said, it's at points it's like you're going a couple of rounds with Agent Smith because of the extra dimensional aspect of 4DX and the seat shaking stuff, but there's also all of this brilliant sort of mind bent, like all the kind of warping cinematography and the changing between the Matrix and stuff. I think it's really added to by 4DX actually. In IMAX, you've got Dunkirk and Interstellar, so continuing on with the Christopher Nolan theme. Dunkirk in IMAX. Ooh. Yes, please.
Yeah,
but also
absolutely, yeah.
But also, no, thank you, because that film is one of the most stressful experiences I've ever had. It is an amazing, amazing film, and I loved it to pieces. But man, you really do come out of that feeling this sort of the weight of years on you, don't you? Right? Like it is just non-stop pressure for the viewer, and I think, and obviously for all the characters within the film, but I think it's one of the most remarkable cinematic experiences because you come out of it with a sort of better sense of what people went through, just because the film is so unrelenting. There is no break at any point in the action. It is so good. You've also got Jumanji 2 in Screen X. The Next Level is the subtitle of the Jumanji film, which I've seen in the cinema and I think is brilliant. It's really, really funny. Someone becomes a horse. That's great. What more do you want? You've also got Notting Hill. I'm Just a Girl standing in front of a boy asking him to love her. And you've got Lord of the Rings 1, 2, and 3. So you could spend the next week in the cinema if you wanted to. Oh, yeah.
And you want to talk about like experiencing things as well. Like Inception's coming back into cinemas as well. Part of this Christopher Nolan series that Cineworld have got going on at the moment in the lead up to Tenet. And that's going to be on in 4DX. And like, Inception is quite a trippy little movie anyway. But like, yeah, exactly. Like that film is constantly moving. So your seat is going to be constantly moving as well. Like I'm really excited to see that film in that 4DX.
The seat closes.
Yeah. I'm just like, because the film's great anyway. But man, seeing that in 4DX and the way that 4DX can kind of like shape a movie into this new experience, I think it's going to be, I don't even know, man. Like when you're watching, every time I watch Inception anyway, I'm like, man, I don't even know. Like, I don't even know like what even happened with the 4DX aspect to it as well. Super excited for that.
So one of my favorite things about 4DX, like I think this is really is my like, it's not even in the really big scenes that I truly love 4DX. It's the tiny moments of where that sort of slight shift in the seats matches the camera work in the film, and I think that really adds a dimension to the thing that you're watching, because you know, like really good panning shots do transport you a little bit, and then just that subtle movement of yourself as well really drags you right in. And I think Inception is the perfect film for just a little bit of movement to add to that kind of queasy atmosphere that Christopher Nolan went for with the cinematography in this, where everything is bending and turning on its head. And I think you're really gonna, you know, I think you should definitely try and take a travel pill for this one. But like, I think it's going to be amazing. I think you're really going to get this kind of like warping sense of reality from watching it in 4DX. And if any of those films have tickled your fancy, then you can book tickets to see them at Cineworld by clicking the link in the video description down below. So it's DC Fandom at the end of this month, and James Gunn, who is directing the second The Suicide Squad, which is not a direct, is sort of a direct sequel to Suicide Squad, but sort of isn't. Like
a soft reboot.
They're being coy. It's going to have some of the same characters as Suicide Squad, and Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn is definitely going to be in it, and Jai Courtney's Boomerang are certainly in there too. But it's kind of going to be a soft reboot and repackage and relaunch that franchise with James Gunn at the helm. And he has just said that is going to be DC Fandom is going to be the first place that we're going to get to see footage from his new envisioning of this film franchise. Is that something you're excited for, Luke?
I mean, I've just recently rewatched both Guardians of the Galaxy and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, sort of in a rewatch of the MCU that I'm doing. And particularly in Guardians 2, I completely reevaluated that movie. Like I always loved Guardians, the first one, but the second one I kind of thought like maybe it had some few issues. But I'm now I'm riding a James Gunn high at the moment, and like seeing him on Twitter talking about like his original vision that he had for Scooby-Doo back in the early 2000s. I'm really riding this high of like, man, I love James Gunn again. So absolutely, yeah. Like I really want to see what he's going to do with the Suicide Squad, and it's interesting that he was the guy that they picked to do this movie, because the first Suicide Squad that we got a couple of years ago really felt like it was Warner Brothers telling David Ayer, hey, make us Guardians of the Galaxy. And David Ayer didn't really know how to make that movie. And so Warner Brothers kind of like, it became sort of a bit of a mess. So now Warner Brothers is just like, well, we don't need David Ayer. We don't need to ask David Ayer to be James Gunn. We'll just ask James Gunn to be James Gunn.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, you know, Guardians of the Galaxy proves that James Gunn understands the ragtag bunch of misfits cinema experience. He really gets how to bring a group that shouldn't fit together and make all those interpersonal dynamics really work. And like, he did a brilliant job in Guardians of showing the friction between all the different characters, like Rocket and Quill always fighting over leadership, Gamora and Quill's will they won't they relationship, Drax being the sort of willful idiot of the bunch and always causing havoc because of his desire to run into chaos. And I think he's going to get that same mileage out of the Suicide Squad characters, because these are all bad people brought together for good reasons. And I think that, there's a lot of bandwidth in that for emotional interplay between all these characters. And I think James Gunn is very, very good at doing that in a way that is like huge on action, huge on comedy, but also the whole time that you're laughing and going, wow, that's amazing. There's that subtle undertone of emotion there that you're not really, you don't know until you get to the end of Guardians of the Galaxy 2 and you'd be like, my God, I loved Yondu. I didn't know I loved Yondu so much. And then you're just like, yeah, he is Mary Poppins, for crying out loud. And I think that's brilliant. And then I think what's great about this as well, in a way that, the DC universe has struggled with, because it's Warner Brothers is such a big company and has so many big brands and has quite tight control on the way they're presented. You've got things like the Justice League that, we're getting the Snyder cut of that now after a lot of fan debate and Scott Snyder pushing for it. And, because Warner Brothers meddled a lot in the production of it, seemingly. You've got people asking even to see the David Ayer cut of Suicide Squad, because Warner Brothers picked a date that it was going to be out in cinemas and told him to write it really quickly and get it out there. And like, would it be nice to see his perfect vision of this film? And then part of this announcement that James Gunn did about about us seeing The Suicide Squad was somebody asking him, can you confirm that this is 100% your vision with no interference from the studio and from other people? And James Gunn put out a tweet that said, I can confirm #The Suicide Squad is 100% zero interference, no holds barred me. And again, I can't wait for you guys to get a glimpse of it at DC Fandom. So we are getting his unblemished, uncompromised version of this film, as far as we know. And that is a really, really good thing, I think, because he really does have a very strong directorial vision. And you know, like if they wanted a rip of Guardians of the Galaxy for the first Suicide Squad, getting the man who did Guardians of the Galaxy to put his twist and his own flavor on the Suicide Squad is a really, really good idea.
Yeah, we talked about The Vigil earlier. That's a film that is a director's vision being put onto the screen. That is a director who wants to tell a story, and they are telling that story. And we're looking to get that again with James Gunn and The Suicide Squad. And he's a man who made me cry over a tree. So like I can't wait to see what he's going to do with, and this has got a huge cast of characters as well, like a huge cast of characters and a huge cast of like well-known names that are all going to die very, very early on in the movie. Like I think that there's not going to be a lot of people walking out of this film. So
just Margot Robbie, that'd be it.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just, Margot Robbie might be the last person standing. Like it's gonna be like Battle Royale. And and so, yeah, I'm excited for that. But that's all we've got time for on this edition of What's On at Cineworld. I've been Luke Coe, and this has been Laurie Blake. Subscribe to this channel because we'll have another show next Friday talking about more big releases, talking about the biggest news in movies. Take care, everyone, and have fun at the cinema. Feel more.